I had barely finished unpacking the last moving box when it happened. The pounding on my front door so loud, it rattled the picture frames on the wall. I rushed over, thinking maybe it was an emergency, only to find a group of stern-faced people on my porch, clipboards in hand and scowls plastered across their faces. Before I could even say hello, the woman in front, who clearly thought she ran the show, jabbed her finger at me and barked, "That pier behind your house belongs to the community. You have no right to use it." I blinked, stunned. The pier? The very pier that came with the property I had just purchased, the one I thought was my sanctuary on the water. They didn't even give me a chance to explain before shoving papers in my face, threatening fines, legal action, and demanding immediate compliance as if I were some squatter trespassing on their land. My excitement about a fresh start, instantly, twisted into a knot of dread. The arrogance in their eyes told me they were used to getting their way, intimidating, bullying, controlling, and for a split second I felt the sting of panic. But deep down, I couldn't help but smirk because these self-proclaimed rulers of the neighborhood had no idea who they were dealing with. They thought they could strong-arm me into giving up their pier. What they didn't know was that I didn't just own that pier, I owned the entire Marina. Moving into that lakeside house was supposed to be the start of a brand new chapter in my life, one I had worked years to finally earn. I still remember the first morning after the movers left, the sun rising over the glittering water, the air crisp with the scent of pine trees and the quiet hum of boats in the distance. For the first time in a long while I felt peace settle into my bones, as though this place was more than just a house. It was a dream I had finally grabbed with both hands. The pier stretching out from my backyard felt like the crown jewel of it all. A place where I could sip coffee in the morning, dangle my feet over the water in the afternoon and watch the stars shimmer at night. To me, it wasn't just wood and nails. It was freedom, privacy, and a symbol of every sacrifice I had made to get here. At first, I didn't think much of the curious glances from the neighbors as they passed by. Some would slow down, whisper to each other, even point toward the pier with expressions I couldn't quite read. There was one woman in particular, sharp eyes, stiff posture, who always seemed to linger a little longer than necessary, her lips curling into a tight, disapproving line. I brushed it off, chalking it up to small-town curiosity. After all, I was the newcomer and people talk. But in the back of my mind, a faint unease began to take root, a whisper of doubt that maybe this community wasn't as welcoming as I had first imagined. Still, I convinced myself it was nothing, completely unaware of the storm that was quietly brewing against me. It didn't take long before the whispers turned into action, and the first real confrontation came like a thunderclap. Just a week. After settling in, I heard the sound of multiple footsteps crunching across my gravel driveway, followed by sharp knocks that echoed through the entire house. When I opened the door, there they were again, the same group of stone-faced neighbors, led by that woman with the permanent scowl. This time, they weren't just pointing fingers. They carried official-looking papers, their clipboards stacked, with documents stamped in bold red letters. With no attempt at courtesy, she announced, "This pier belongs to the HOA and the entire community. You have no right to claim it as yours." Before I could get a word in, she pushed the papers into my hands, rattling off a list of supposed violations and fines, as if she had been rehearsing this speech for weeks. My heart sank as I skimmed through the threats. Talk of liens on my property, legal fees, even warnings about towing my boat if I dared dock it overnight. Their voices overlapped, harsh and accusatory, painting me as some selfish outsider trying to steal from the neighborhood. I tried to argue, to tell them the pier was included in my purchase contract, but every sentence I spoke was drowned out by their escalating tone. For the first time since I moved in, I felt a genuine chill of panic. Was I really about to lose the very thing that drew me to this house in the first place? Had I been tricked, misled, or scammed? Their confidence made me doubt myself, and as I stood there clutching those threatening letters, one terrifying thought clawed at me. What if they were right, and everything I had worked for was about to crumble before my eyes? The days that followed were nothing short of a nightmare, a steady drumbeat of harassment that grew louder with every sunrise. At first it was little things. Neighbors I hadn't even met yet deliberately parking their cars across my driveway, members of the HOA striding right through my backyard, as if it were their personal walkway, and notes slipped into my mailbox. With words like "community property, stay off" scrawled in thick black marker. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that reason would eventually win out. But ignoring bullies only seemed to fuel their fire. Soon they escalated to pounding on my door at all hours, demanding I remove my boat, threatening to tow it, and insisting. The pier was scheduled to be reclaimed for the community. Each encounter left me angrier, more anxious, and increasingly unsure of how far they were willing to go. What unnerved me most was their sheer confidence. They carried themselves like they had the law on their side, their words dripping with authority that made me question whether I had overlooked something crucial in my purchase. One night, sitting at my dining table with their so-called violation, letters spread out before me. I felt that sinking dread. What if they were right? What if I had been duped into buying a property with a pier that wasn't really mine? But a stubborn fire burned in me too, and I refused to be pushed around. Without knowing the truth, quietly I reached out to a real estate attorney, explaining every detail and sliding the deed and contracts across his desk. He adjusted his glasses, leafed through the documents with methodical precision, and then looked up with a faint smirk. That sent a surge of relief rushing through me. "Not only does this pier belong to you," he said, tapping the paperwork, "but according to these documents, the entire marina falls under your ownership rights. You're not just some property owner. They should be asking your permission to use the water, not the other way around." I left his office that day with my heart pounding, clutching those papers like a weapon. For the first time since the nightmare began, I felt the balance of power shift ever so slightly in my favor, but I knew I couldn't reveal my hand too soon. If the HOA had been smug before, I wanted their arrogance to peak just before I crushed it completely. And peak it did. Days later, they delivered a bold letter announcing an emergency HOA meeting where my violation would be the central topic. They made it clear they expected me to show up, confess, and surrender the pier back to the community, or face crippling fines and legal action. The tone was dripping with condescension, as if my defeat was already sealed, and they were, simply gathering to watch me fold. As the date drew closer, the tension in the neighborhood became unbearable. Some neighbors avoided my eyes altogether, while others smirked when they saw me, whispering that I was finished. The woman leading the charge strutted past my property, daily, glaring at me with a victorious grin as if she had already won. And though my blood boiled, I kept my secret close, pretending to look cornered, letting them believe their intimidation had worked. But inside I was rehearsing every word I would say, visualizing the moment I would walk into their meeting and turn their world upside down. The pier was never theirs to begin with, and soon they would discover that the power they thought they had over me was nothing compared to the authority I actually held over the entire marina. The night of the emergency meeting felt like walking straight into enemy territory. The HOA had gathered in the community hall, rows of folding chairs filled with residents who had come more for the spectacle than the outcome. At the front, behind, a long table sat the so-called board, their expressions smug and self-assured, the president tapping a gavel with theatrical authority. The moment I stepped inside, a hush fell over the room, and then the whispers started, rippling like a wave. "That's him. He's the one with the pier. This will be over quick." I took my seat calmly, hiding the bundle of documents under my arm while the president launched into a speech dripping with arrogance. She listed my violations, accusing me of theft, of refusing to comply with community rules, even suggesting that my presence was a threat to their way of life. Every sentence was punctuated with nods and murmurs of agreement from her loyal followers, and for a while, it felt like I was a defendant in a trial where the verdict had already been decided. Finally, she leaned forward and said in a sharp voice, "You will surrender the pier back to the community effective immediately." That was the moment I stood up, my hands steady, my voice calm, but carrying across the entire hall. "No," I said, pulling out the papers. "You've been barking up the wrong tree. This pier isn't yours, it's mine, and not just this pier." I spread the documents across the table for everyone to see, the legal seals and signatures gleaming under the fluorescent lights. I own the entire marina. The silence that followed was deafening. Eyes widened, mouths fell open, and for a few seconds the board sat frozen, as if the ground had been ripped out from beneath them. The president's face flushed crimson, her jaw working furiously but no words escaping. Gasps echoed from the crowd, and someone in the back actually laughed out loud. I let the moment hang in the air, savoring the shock, before calmly taking my seat again. For the first time since I moved in, the balance of power had shifted completely, and it was all in my hands. After that night, the tone of the neighborhood shifted like a storm that had suddenly passed, leaving nothing but stunned silence in its wake. The once overconfident HOA board, who had strutted around with clipboards and threats, now avoided eye contact when they passed me on the street. Their authority had been shattered in front of everyone, and no amount of posturing could erase the humiliation of being exposed for their lies and intimidation. The neighbors who once whispered and smirked now gave me cautious nods of respect, some even stopping by to quietly admit they had no idea the board was pushing so far beyond its limits. For me, the sweetest victory wasn't just proving them wrong. It was reclaiming my peace, the very peace I had moved here for in the first place. I spent the following weekend on my pier, the water calm, the sun warm against my face, a cup of coffee in hand, and the knowledge that I had stood my ground against bullies who thought they could take what was never theirs. Every creak of the wood beneath my chair, every ripple of the water around the pilings, reminded me that this wasn't just about owning a piece of property. It was about standing up for what's rightfully mine. And as I looked out over the Marina, the boat swaying gently in the breeze, I felt a quiet satisfaction settle in my chest. Never let bullies scare you out of what belongs to you. Ever. If this story kept you hooked and you enjoyed watching me turn the tables on HOA bullies, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join this channel. I share unbelievable, real life battles where ordinary people stand up against arrogance, intimidation, and abuse of power, and win. Don't let the next jaw-dropping story pass you by. Subscribe now, hit the bell icon, and be part of a community that loves seeing justice served where it's least expected.